All right, welcome everybody. Today is November 12th. This is SIG Instrumentation, and we've got a couple of items on the agenda today. And the first one is by David. Take it away.
Cool. So basically someone came to SIGNode recently talking about the conformance tests that they're trying to add for node-related APIs. One of those APIs is the node proxy API. And what the conformance folks would like to do is either be able to test all of the APIs or start removing ones that are not going to be included in conformance. And during the meeting, most of the node folks didn't have any use cases that were node related for the proxy API, but I believe the Prometheus server makes makes use of the proxy APIs to query node metrics, for example. So the first question is, do we want to keep this API around? And I suspect, unless I'm mistaken, I suspect the answer is yes, because a lot of folks depend on it. But we could also explore like what it would mean if we didn't have that API and what we'd have to do instead. And then the second question is, okay, how do we actually conformance test this endpoint? And the issue is that Kubernetes conformance considers almost all of the stuff that we run on nodes to be an implementation detail. So for example, you're allowed to create a pod object and then look to see if the pod object is running, but you're not allowed to create a pod object and then query the container runtime to see if it's there. So we're not supposed to rely on the presence of kubelet endpoints or node problem detector endpoints or any of those things. This is more of I'd like to make sure that the people on this call who work on the Prometheus server voice their use case, but also then we might need to work with SIGNode to figure out how to exercise that endpoint if we do decide we need it.
Yeah, so I am fairly certain that a lot of people in the Prometheus ecosystem do make use of this for exactly what you just said. I think basically people use it so that they don't have to discover nodes in some way or something, or maybe it has to do with RBAC or something. So that essentially what they do is they use this API to query every single node in the cluster for their metrics. I personally have always said that nobody should be doing this because essentially you're putting the API in between as kind of a failure domain. I've always said that this is a bad idea, but nevertheless, a lot of people do make use of it for exactly this reason. So, yeah.
Yeah. I can discuss this case more, but I think I'm more interested not about Prometheus use for this endpoint, but this node proxy being the main way that most debugging is done for Samara API. I think every case that I've seen someone having problem with Samara API, you have easy way to one-liner to always get to the from any point to check if the metrics exposed by kubelet are correct and if kubelet is doing the correct things. I think it also applies checking version, checking if you do any debugging from outside of cluster, and one node is not working, checking if Samara API, what version this kubelet is running, is it reporting, all those things are done currently via this API, at least when from me or people I know debug this.
I don't understand why this is a SIG instrumentation thing. This is more than SIG instrumentation, right? This is one.
I don't think that's what David was saying.
Yeah. I'm trying to make sure.
Has the stake here.
Yeah.
We've got some
Yeah.
use cases that they are worried about breaking, and they want our input for our use cases. We don't own this. This is a SIG node thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so like people are using this in a way that probably should not officially be supported because it's kind of, it seems like it's kind of hacky.
I tend to agree. As I said, I've always discouraged this for the Prometheus use case. People, as I said, people still make use of this widely anyways, even though it is discouraged in various places. But yeah, I don't know if we would potentially be like, I don't think we should remove it, but I don't think we should necessarily add it to conformance either. But I guess that was kind of the point of all of this, right?
But
Yeah.
most of the proxy use cases are kind of sketchy, right? I feel like all of the use cases for proxy endpoints are kind of like this, right? They're like,
So proxy endpoints are like compared to normal like kubelet I know accessing metrics. Those are like proxying is considered an admin only activity, and basically you can, it's attack surface that gives you root, you can easily jump to root from it. So any like so usually those kind of, this kind of API should be only used for debugging by administrator if everything else fails, or like administrator cannot access the node directly. So as there are a couple of architectures or distributions that use this architecture, like GKE. So debugging via this API is very like useful, but also it should never be used by case that is popular by Kubernetes community, Prometheus community, where they use it as a like network without skipping need to set up proper networking or proxying, because like I said before, this is basically a root action that is super worrying from security standpoint.
yeah, well, I mean, like the argument is like, even without the SIG instrumentation hat on, right? Like, should we be conformance testing proxy endpoints? Because like, that's like most of those use cases are going to be kind of sketchy. And then basically, if you write a conformance test for it, then you're basically saying, this is the expected behavior that we are now endorsing all of Kubernetes distributions to I mean, that feels kind of
so
bad.
possibly it's expected behavior that administrator can use that, but that's the sketchy thing, that this is like, if we consider what are the administrator use cases, then yes. If we are not considering like as a standard debugging tools, like APIs that are needed for debugging as part of standard conformance, then I agree with those use cases not being really
Directly from, sorry, I was just reading. Sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was the next step. They're basically saying this, I think. I think that's fine. We don't really want to encourage this, right?
Okay, so the second question then is that if SIG node is interested in deprecating these endpoints, are there use cases we still want to support through them? Are we okay deprecating and removing them? Should we reach out to any of the, like if there's any representative groups that are making heavy use of them, can we?
API reviews. You should talk to API review, architecture, proxy. Yeah, you should probably talk to Jordan Leggett.
Okay, well, my main objective here was to request feedback if anyone does have use cases. So you can leave that on the issue I linked.
I mean, a potential, like, let's say the Prometheus use case was something that we wanted to continue to support. We could do that in a very targeted way, as opposed to a general proxy, right?
Maybe like through a new API server resource, or just
It could be pretty much exactly this, except for yeah, I guess it would be a new sub resource of nodes, which would be metrics, and it just proxies through to the metrics endpoint. I believe that is exactly what people use it for. Not that I think that this is a good idea, but if there are too many people using this, it could be a middle ground.
cool. I think that's it for that agenda item then.
Okay, then the second one we have is Elena.
Yeah, so I got a ping from, I think, Contribex about developer documentation updates. So that's the linked issue. Initially, I sort of misunderstood the request. Basically, they are going through all of the developer documentation. So this is not tied to a release. This is general Kubernetes development documentation. And they're asking basically that every SIG owns their documentation and trying to get it updated. So like, we don't necessarily have to go and update it, but if there's anything that is like obviously terribly wrong and out of date, like Docker from the Stone Age or something like that, they have requested that we try to update that so that it's not like totally wrong. So I think for the most part, like I took a look through things and I think it's mostly up to date. We probably want to add, and this is maybe going to be a question for David. So we currently have some documentation for metrics or instrumentation, for like logging, for like how to write events, and then I think also the structured logging migration. So that's all great. But we might also want to add some for traces, and we might also want to ensure that like somebody's assigned to review all of these so they are up to date. So this is like not urgent or anything like that. But it would be good so that people, we definitely have gotten a lot of questions about like, is this the only documentation there is for this style guide? And like, what do we do about this metric stuff? And I know with some of the current caps for like adding more metrics to various components, we've had some discussions about naming policies and whatnot. So it might be also that it's not just a matter of documenting things, that there's also some decisions that we need to make as a SIG and then write documentation for them. But I just wanted to, sort of bring this up as a general topic and see what people had to say, and if anybody wanted to like jump in on specific docs.
I think there was one specific one that is super actionable already, that like anybody who wants to could immediately take, which is that was like linked out to, which is wrappers like for the metrics framework that we have, that we actually document those in the instrumentation guide, which we don't today.
We have some documentation somewhere though, right?
I think it was in the cap and it didn't actually make it into the guide. So it might just be a migration, like something easy like that. I mean, it's not great to have them in multiple places, but people tend to not look at the cap once the cap is implemented.
I always get confused about where all the docs are because there's like several different spots for this stuff. There's also the website stuff. I have patched some of the website stuff, and then there's like
it's here. Oh, actually, yeah. Lily also mentioned something in the chat about global metrics registry. I think this has been something that we've wanted to add for a long time. I think the biggest problem about adding docs about global metrics registry right now is that everything's still using the global metrics registry. So we would be recommending something that nobody's doing right now in Kubernetes.
No, Kubelet uses non-global registries because they have multiple metrics endpoints.
Okay, in some places it does, yes.
So there are examples of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the main point is to go onwards with a better solution rather than having people go to the global registry by default. But just a suggestion. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess since what Han said, I think you're actually right. We should, since there is precedence already in the code base, then I think it's a really great suggestion. Apparently, the instrumentation quick start guide doesn't mention the wrappers.
So do we, I guess, how do we make this actionable? We've talked about a bunch of possible different things that we could be doing here. Is there specific things that people want to like volunteer for? Do you want to like document that against that larger tracking issue to say that you're doing that? How do we want to proceed with this? Because at least the ask initially that came in, like definitely we need to do all this other stuff and this is great. But the ask that initially came in was just like, please review your existing documentation and make sure it's not like, you know, totally like out there. So I don't know that we've had anybody volunteer for that.
I can do this. I assigned this thing to myself because, yeah, I can write documents for the stability framework.
I'll put a comment on the overall community issue saying that you're going to do the initial first pass review. If you need to make any changes, like feel free to ping me or other people for review on those things. I mean, I think you're an approver, so you don't need anybody to approve for you. But and then if anybody else wants to pick up any of those other things, I tried to take a list in the doc or in the notes in the agenda, so you can feel free to like stick your name beside it, file an issue or something, work on it, poke people for reviews. That's totally fine.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think we have a way forward here. Should we go on to the next point on the agenda? Marek, go ahead.
Yeah, so Elena suggested to bring over like this more discussion to some recent doc that I wrote regarding metric server. So overall, I wanted to collect I created a document that collects all my thoughts about why metric server, like there are some problems with metric server, how it compares to other solutions like Prometheus adapter or overall metric server is used mainly for autoscaling, how it compares to custom metrics autoscaling. So at the end, it lists some ideas, what should be improved, what should we change, or what to focus on. But I think Elena brought really important point that we should ask like community and gather some like feedback, and we don't have currently any like channels how we could organize feedback. I know, asking people what they think about like what could be improved in some project. So I think that would be maybe possibly like part of discussion that I would want to bring to the meeting would be how, if we have some like strategy ideas or like we are thinking about long term how the project will evolve, how we should collect feedback and how we can improve this.
I mean, in general, I think Kubernetes as a product has run like surveys a couple of times for where we needed like user feedback. I think, is that kind of what you're looking for potentially?
Yeah, we could reach out to like Contribex to help with that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, if that's the direct way, I think that would make sense.
Yeah, I think this would make sense. Was there anything in particular, I didn't have time to read through the whole thing, that you wanted feedback on in terms of this issue?
So that I think that I know. So yeah, maybe I think that two goals, like first bring this document to over like to the meet to wider audience, as both maintainers of metric server agree that this looks like a overall good direction, and I think we agree. So that's done. And second, I think we agreed that we will reach out to contributors. I don't know, Elena, would be how would you be able to help with that? Or,
Yeah, I can help with
someone
that.
could
Let me
reach
just.
to?
I'll assign myself to this, and then I'll just put a note on here that we want to reach out to Contribx to try to run a user survey. Okay, done.
Okay, I think that's for this topic.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think we had a last-minute addition.
Oh, I just added some announcements. Do we have
okay.
any other business before announcements?
I was wondering if anybody wanted to discuss any of the like potential name.
Yeah, that one PR.
I think there might be two. Is this the scheduler and the other? Okay, let me try to link the PRs.
Yeah, the cube pod.
I found the scheduler one, and I'm just hunting for the other PR. I think it's this one. I guess that one's technically on the kubelet.
Yes.
Okay, then I will add that. Does someone want to give some context around this? Is it going to be me?
I can give context.
Yeah, David, go ahead.
Okay, so the scheduler one is based on the KEP that Clayton wrote that I think a lot of you already reviewed. It adds a metric to the scheduler to describe the requests of pods that the scheduler is aware of. And it, in the KEP, proposed a naming convention starting with cube underscore pod underscore resource underscore requests, I think. Basically to mimic what the cube state metrics, pod metrics look like. And as well, it proposed a relabeling, no, not relabeling. It proposed adding rules to the example Prometheus server configuration to take, sorry, there's some echo, to take the C-advisor metrics and rewrite them to sort of match the naming of these new scheduler metrics. At the same time, there's been some interest in the SIG node community to adding direct pod level metrics, because if you're running with a sandbox like Kata containers or something, then you'll have significant overhead for your pod that isn't captured as part of the containers. And so SIG node has been talking about that and agreed that it was a good idea to add a metric for that as well. So the question is, one, are we okay with the cube underscore pod name for the scheduler metrics? And two, for the kubelets endpoint, should we try and align with the existing metric names, which look similar to C-advisor metric names? I think container, CPU usage, seconds total, that sort of thing, no cube, no resources. Or should we align with Clayton's new proposed naming, starting with cube?
So I mean, I had a discussion with a couple of you yesterday already about this, but I want to reiterate here. I feel like we kind of have two types of classes of metrics that we generally tend to expose in Kubernetes. One being about the component itself, and then one being about something that we kind of invented within Kubernetes, being some entity within Kubernetes, right? So a pod, a deployment, etc. And I think it would actually be nice if we had for everything that was kind of meta, that we had this kube prefix to kind of signify this is something within Kubernetes, but not necessarily about this component right now. So that's at least how I've always viewed all of these metrics. I mean, I've primarily only interacted with them from kubestate metrics because there we actually totally consistently apply this pattern. But I think it would be useful to have this everywhere, which brings me to the one of the previous points. If we decide we want to do this, this should probably be in the instrumentation guidelines.
Yeah, so I was I guess, possibly the lone dissenter. I'm not really sure. So my concern with this was, well, there were two things. So I come at these metrics from an operator's perspective. And like when I'm using metrics, like I need to be able to understand certain things very, very quickly about those metrics, where the metric is from, because if the metric is misbehaving, like I'm very worried that, like, well, what component is misbehaving? So if that's not clear from the metric name, that was a concern for me. And so there was, a proposal to say, like, use kubepod for these metrics coming out of the scheduler. But the other problem is that, like, when I see a cube underscore metric, traditionally those have all come from kube state metrics. So as a cluster operator, if I see a cube underscore pod metric, I'm going to go look at the documentation in kube state metrics to see about that metric. I'm not going to find it there because it's not actually coming from kube state metrics. So I'm confused about, or I'm concerned that, like, this might cause confusion, that this stuff is not really inherent to the name anymore. And I think that, a lot of these things in terms of like making like sort of global naming, like as, these global concepts and whatnot, like they overall make sense, but we have problems right now in that, like, metrics are not very well documented. And like, that's something that I think we have to really, really well communicate. Because like right now, effectively, like the only documentation on metrics is reading the code and possibly like some of the help text that pops up from the Prometheus scrape. It's not like a thing that's easily discoverable. And because operators rely on these conventions in the absence of that documentation and communication, when we go and break them, I think it's going to make a lot of people really confused. So that's my concern.
I am 100% on board with the discoverability of metrics thing. Like, 100%. I had this argument with Frederick like a while ago, but I think we can just add a descriptors endpoint to it so that people can just curl an endpoint and get all of the registered metric descriptors and labels. I think that would make sense, right? Like,
I'm not sure that necessarily solves the problem at hand. I think the endpoint could make sense, although as we discussed yesterday, I'm not 100% convinced that it's actually that much better than a metrics scrape. But like, I'm happy to be proven wrong based on data. But the point of like, I feel like we should be consistent in one way or another, right? And right now we definitely do not have a consistent rule for this. And I would prefer if we did.
I propose that we enforce subsystem. We have static analysis, right?
For
so
just to pause, y'all, because we're at time and we've had at least one person drop. I think that we should continue this conversation in our next meeting. And I just, if it's okay, I really want to quickly make some announcements before people drop, because we've got dates and meeting cancellations and stuff upcoming. Is that cool? Okay, cool. So dates and stuff. Today is code freeze, as mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. So anything that we want to get in for 120, we got to do it now. Doc freeze is upcoming on November 30th. And I think people mostly have placeholder doc PRs open, but make sure, to get that stuff done. And the other announcement I wanted to make is it is the end of the year season where we cancel a lot of meetings. So I'm trying to make sure that everything is reflected on like the agenda doc so you can see which meetings have been canceled, and the calendar has also been updated. But next week, KubeCon, no triage. Week after, US Thanksgiving, no meeting. So I think our next scheduled meeting is going to be the triage session the first week of December. We should have a regular meeting after that. And then I don't know what we should do for meetings for the end of the year. Do we want to have one more triage and then meet in the new year?
What days would that be?
The next triage would be, I think, the 16th of December. And then our next like normal actual meeting would be like the 24th, which I think is Christmas Eve. So that's probably not going to happen. So I'm assuming we'd cancel the meeting on the 24th and the 30th of December.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So then I will go ahead and do that. And then that'll be all of our meetings for 2020, and we'll resume meeting regularly in 2021.
Woohoo.
In regards to code freeze, I guess Clayton is gonna want to try to get this in, right? So are we okay with saying just to get this into the release, he can keep the name he wants to for now, and there will still be a decision made on a more general basis, or how do you feel about that?
Personally, I commented, and I from at least Cube State Metrics and from an operator perspective, I don't see a problem with using the Cube pod. There's always the target labels, like job label, which describes where the metric originates. So that's how I differentiate between them. So I really don't see a problem with that.
Yeah,
at
I
least
tend to
from my
agree with that.
perspective. Yeah, and from Cube State Metrics perspective, we were thinking at some point of renaming them all with KSM in the beginning with a prefix instead of cube. I think we then at some point dropped that because we already have that convention, and yeah, people are used to them. And these metrics are supposed to be a drop-in replacement for the ones we already have. So I think it's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be in favor of labeling the Cube State metrics with the KSM prefix. I know that would probably break a bunch of people. Maybe that's like a 2.0-ish sort of thing. I think 2.0 is out now, right?
Yeah, it's too late for that. We were
The ship
thinking
has
for
sailed.
2.0, but I mean, it's not out yet, but that would be too much breaking changes as we already had testers. But we were considering that, but at some point we dropped it as it would be way too many alerting and recording rules to rename.
Makes sense. I think we should probably have a future agenda item to continue discussing this.
Yes, that sounds good. Okay, let's make sure we have that, and then I would say we call it a day, and everybody have a wonderful local time. All right.
See you, everyone.